All right, is that better? Yeah, it was just a matter of for whatever reason, my mic it was using something else. But now it looks like we're in business. All right, cool. Okay, so welcome back. Thanks for bearing with me through those technical issues. Yeah, so I finally got, it never ends. So I'm supposed to get like one gig speeds, and I set everything up. I hooked up directly to the router. Well, first of all, I threw a cable all the way here to the office, and I got this hub set up, so now I can connect more devices here. Um, but one of the things that I noticed was that I was only getting 100, well, only 100 megabytes, which it's pretty good, but I'm paying for more, so I need to call the company and ask why is it that I'm not getting what I'm paying for. So that is to be determined. But for the meantime, we're all hooked up to the Ethernet. We're wired, so that should hopefully improve um, streaming a bit, the quality. So let's see here. All right. So last time we left off, where we were having trouble reading this file because it was way too big and we were running out of memory. Now, one of the things we could have done was that we could go ahead and write our own sort of reader, right? So our JSON reader, so that it reads and it reads our data in sort of a streaming fashion, right? Because initially we tried to use the data frame API, which is a fairly new sort of API within the .NET ecosystem. It's still very experimental. Um, Unfortunately, one of the limitations there was that it only loads CSV files, right? So as a result of that, we can't really use that. We can't use that. The other thing we tried to do was we tried to use the built-in System.Text.Json to try to load this, to load the JSON file. Unfortunately, behind the scenes, when you basically try to deserialize information or we try to deserialize data with the JSON System.Text.Json, it loads everything into memory, right? Which again, it still doesn't get around problem. So, what is an alternative that we can? What's something that we can use to basically process large amounts of data that can read multiple formats and do so in a fairly quick and distributed way? And the answer to that is Spark, right? So with Apache Spark, it's built for big data, right? So, 3 gigs to some folks, perhaps you're working with more data out there. So 3 gigs may be like, yeah, that's nothing. But at least for our VM, it's way more than it can handle. So we're just gonna go ahead and try to use Apache Spark. Now we're not using Apache Spark specifically like either the Scala or the PySpark version, right? We're using .NET for Apache Spark, which if you folks aren't familiar with it, let me just see here. So if you folks aren't familiar with it, this is something that I think it was announced version at build 2019, I believe, version 0.1. And basically, it's an open source project. And it works for .NET. And essentially, it's a set of .NET bindings, so you can use C# and F#, and I suppose VB as well, to build Spark applications, right? But again, you're using the languages and the tooling that you know and love. So what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to use .NET for Apache Spark to process our data, and let's see how far we get. So the first thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to log into our VM, which I haven't done yet. But essentially, once we log into our VM, we will be able to, we're going to want to install it first. And actually, shameless plug. There are actually setup instructions here. There's also Spark. So if you go to the Microsoft Docs, right, you can look at the Get Started guide, and this is actually in the process of being cleaned up a little bit, right? But essentially, the steps should still work without a problem. Now, in this case, it doesn't really go through the commands exactly, right? It kind of just tells you to do these things, and because we're not going to be installing it in Windows, we need to do something a little bit different. Fortunately, shameless plug, I did this. Yeah. So that's a really good question, user, to you. The question is, so are you only using one VM, or how are you taking advantage of the distributed nature of Spark? Yeah. So I'm gonna distribute computation, but really I'm gonna run it on a single node cluster, right? And Apache Spark works on a single node cluster. Of course, the real benefits that you get from its distributed computation model is if you're using it as part of a cluster, right? In this case, I'm not going to go ahead and set up a cluster for various reasons. Number one, because that gets a little bit more complex, right? You have to set up the connection so that the servers are able to find each other, right? So that sort of the executor and the workers can kind of talk to each other, right? And coordinate work. So that gets a little bit more complex. But the other thing is we're only going to be working with 3 gigs of data, right? Which is not a lot. And you're still able to take advantage somewhat of the distributed sort of distributed computations of Spark in a single node VM. But again, as you mentioned, if you have a cluster, that of course is preferred, right? So, but in this case, we're only going to do a single node cluster. And the way that it does that is even in a single node cluster, right? Spark plans to work accordingly so that it basically partitions the data, right? So that way it's not reading the full 3 gigs. It's reading different partitions of that data. And it's sort of optimizing how it processes and applies transformations to that data, right? So you can still take advantage of it on a single VM, especially if you're doing it for like testing and debugging purposes. A single node VM is good enough, right? And again, especially with like 3 gigs of data, which it is a lot, but at the same time, not really, especially compared to some of the bigger data that's out there. 3 gigs is small. It's I guess small within the big data ecosystem, if you will. So yeah, so I have this blog post that I wrote last year where I installed. It's actually a more in length. Essentially, what I was doing, I was trying to perform ETL and data enrichment. And use Spark with ML.NET. Let's see. Yeah, so it's running ETL and data enrichment with Spark and trying to use ML.NET as well to essentially try to make some predictions on restaurant inspection. So if you are interested in sort of following this example and running it yourself, you're more than welcome to. Again, there's a blog post. But what we're going to be taking in here in this case is we're going to take some of the commands that are going to help us install it. And I did this on an Ubuntu system, but which is exactly what our VM is. And as a result, we're just going to take some of the commands from here, which again, you could follow the getting started guide, but on the official Microsoft Docs. But in this one, I actually have the steps themselves. So we're going to do a little bit of that. We're going to just go through a little bit of setup. It's actually not a lot of setup, at least on the .NET side of things, right? So you install everything like you normally would, right? If you're using Spark, you need Java, right? So in this case, we're using the OpenJDK. You need to actually download Spark as well, right? In this case, we're going to be working with Spark 2.4.1. As you work with .NET for Apache Spark, one of the things that you're going to have to be mindful is is the version that I'm working with supported by .NET for Apache Spark. So you'll see in this case, the only version that's not supported is 2.4.2, right? And that's not supported, but then all of them, including the one that we're going to be using, 2.4.1, is supported by .NET for Apache Spark. So let's start by connecting to our VM. And this time I turned it on ahead of time, so you won't have to sit here with me as I turn on my VM or start my VM, because that is as exciting as watching paint dry. Yes. Yes. Hmm. But that's what it was. Interesting. Give me 1 second. And one of the cool things also, so while I'm kind of looking something up here, I'll kind of point you to a few things here. One of the cool things, right, is because essentially from the .NET standpoint, um, you're installing Spark, you're installing Java, then you're installing the Spark worker, which is basically just the way that .NET for Apache Spark binds to Spark, right? Other than this step here of setting up the Spark worker, everything else is pretty much the same steps that you would go through when when you want to work with Spark, right? The only thing that's different is this .NET Spark worker piece, which is kind of the .NET for Apache Spark. And the benefit that you get there, right, is because Spark runs on various environments, right? Then you can take advantage of running it on, say, something like Databricks or HD Insights, Azure HD Insights, right? Or even in AWS EMR Spark. So if you're able to get the .NET worker in whatever cluster it is that you are executing in, or whatever environment you're running Spark in, it should be fairly seamless to also get it working, to also get .NET for Apache Spark working. So that's really cool, or at least I think that's cool. Let's see. Yeah, that's what I thought it was. Oh, that's why it's not going to work, because I was using the wrong. That's the problem of having all these VMs and different logins, is that I forget what the users are. All right, cool. So now that we're in our VM, we're going to want to let me just make sure that Java isn't installed. Okay, perfect. So Java is not installed. We're going to go ahead and install Java 8. Right? I don't think that you need Java 8. Oops. But we're going to go with Java 8 for now. So once that's configured, that we're just going to make sure that the OpenJDK is the version that that we're working with, right? That's the default configuration. So user you said that you know Spark. What sorts of projects, or how do you interact with it? Are you using it with Scala? Are you using PySpark? How are you interacting with it? And what environment are you using it inside of, like um, like Databricks maybe? I assume that most likely it's going to be Databricks. That's probably the most popular way of using it. Or is it something like more of like a on-prem sort of solution? Okay, so that's done. Okay, nothing to configure, and it's using the OpenJDK that we just installed, so perfect. Uh-huh. Oh, gotcha. You don't use it, but you know of it. Yeah. Yeah, Spark really took over. And just to give a little bit of context, so before, right, if you wanted to do any sort of distributed or parallelized type of computations, it was all about Hadoop, right? Hadoop was king. And, sorry. So Hadoop was the Hadoop was a way to do things for the longest time, and it worked okay, but it had some limitations, right? One of the limitations of Hadoop was that your compute and your storage were sort of linked together, right? So HDFS and Hadoop, they were linked together, and as a result, you couldn't decouple. Yeah, you couldn't really decouple them. It was a little bit hard to decouple them. And as with, for example, cloud computing, right? So, for example, right now this VM that we set up, right? We had the storage, right? We bought a disk that we attached to our compute. If at any point we want to scale up or down our compute, we can certainly do that, right? And that is sort of independent from our storage, and we can do the same thing with our storage, scale up or down respectively, but at no point do they have to be sort of linked. And when you decouple those, which is kind of what Spark did, is you were able to essentially accept different formats and sort of abstract a lot of complexities away. So that's kind of one way that Spark sort of improved upon Hadoop. The other way that Spark improved on Hadoop was that Spark processes things in memory, right? And as a result, it does better in terms of performance. The reason is, right, with Hadoop, you were constantly reading from disk, right? Which, as most folks may know, that's more expensive. More expensive time-wise, right? You could certainly, the trade-off is you would probably need a little bit more memory in order to process these things, or to take full advantage of it, but which is more expensive monetarily, right? If you get an instance with more memory, you're going to pay a little bit more, or you get a machine that has more memory, you're going to pay a little bit more. But the trade-off is between time and performance versus cost, right? So which one do you value more? So those are just a few ways that Spark improved upon Hadoop, and now it's sort of like it's the way to go. Now that's not to say that you couldn't use HDFS, for example, the storage system of Hadoop, right? Hadoop file system, to use as sort of input for Spark jobs. But again, it's the field is heavily dominated by Spark. All right, so now that we have this, what we want to do is so now what I did was I downloaded the Spark 2.4.1 version, and what I want to do is I want to essentially place it inside of, I want to unpack the contents into user local bin, right? And that's just so that I'm able to access it via my path. Okay, so now I have that. Now let's get the Spark worker. In this case, so in this example, one of the things that I'll note if you're following it is I use version 0.4.0. It's Spark is actually up to 0.12.1. So just make sure that you download the correct version when you're using it. And actually, it's Netcore app 3.1. And you can actually find the links to these downloads here, right? So you can find the links to the downloads in this repo. If you go to releases, you'll see that here, right? Linux, depending on what you're using, Linux, Windows. In my case, I'm using Linux, right? So I would use this version here. Let's see. All right. So now that we have, wait, did I download it or was I just, here, let me actually just make sure that I got the right link. Okay. Let me copy link and place it here. 12.1, 3.1, 3.1, perfect. And that I just want to download it here. All right, so now we have that. That doesn't look right. Let me actually just take this. I mean, it's a typo, it doesn't matter. It's just what I chose to name it, but just to be consistent here. Beautiful. Whoops, nope, I don't want to save you. Remove Microsoft. All right, so let's try that again. All right, perfect. So now that we have this, we want to do pretty much the exact same thing like we did before. All right, we want to unpack. We want to unpack the contents of that directory into our user local bin. And in terms of content, it's going to be this here, right? We want to change the name of the file to that. Beautiful. So now we have a 0.12.1. And that's in our user local bin. So now we have, so what we've done now is we've installed Java, we've installed Spark, and we've installed the .NET for Apache Spark worker. And the last thing that we want to do though is we want to change the permissions. And the reason you do this for the worker is you want to be able to execute these user-defined functions, right? So if there's something that you want to do with if there's something that you want to do that perhaps you're not able to use any of the built-in functions within .NET for Apache Spark, you can write your own functions and register your own functions and basically execute those as part of your set of transformations. Now, one of the things, though, that you need to be mindful of when you're doing this is the fact that user-defined functions aren't as optimized. And regardless of whether you're using .NET, .NET for Apache Spark or just Apache Spark, the Scala version, right? User-defined functions aren't optimized, right? So any of the built-in functions, those are optimized to run, in sort of like a distributed fashion by Spark, right? So whenever possible, you should try to use the use the built-in functions, which tend to basically leverage a lot of what the Spark internals, right? That's not to say, of course, that you shouldn't use user-defined functions. Of course, there may be scenarios where you really the built-in functions don't get you where you want to be, but as much as possible, you should try to find a way of how can you achieve what you're trying to do using your built-in functions. So just something to be aware of. All right, so now that we've got that, All right, so the final thing that we want to do is we want to add all these things to our environment variables, and the reason for that is that we want our system to be able to find these, right? So if I go to vi.bash rc, right? So I'm going to add this to my profile here. Wait, what? Yep, paste anyway. Okay. Okay, beautiful. Awesome. All right. So, and we just reset our terminal session. So now we should be good to go. All right. So to start off, what we want to do is we want to be able to all right. So what we're going to start off doing is we want to basically create a project, a console project. It will do just fine, where we're going to do some of our work. But for this, it would probably be best to start working with a remote SSH extension, right? Because now we're going to be writing some code. So let's ditch, let's go ahead and ditch the terminal now that we've got everything set up. And probably we should have done all this stuff on using Visual Studio anyway. That way we wouldn't have to sort of switch, switch environments from the terminal to Windows, but that's all right. Remote. Open configuration file. Let me just copy to clipboard. Excuse me, give me 1 second. I'm just trying to open up. Let's see. All right, cool. All right, so it's running Linux. Sure, continue. Okay. And we're in. So now let's go ahead and open a folder. We want to open Stream Projects, Archive Analytics. Okay. This is where we want to work in. All right. Cool. All right. So now that we've got that set up, let's go ahead and create a new .NET. Let's see. .new console Spark Analytics Spark app. Let's just call it Spark app. All right. So got that going. Now what we want to do, we want to install the Microsoft Spark Nougat package. So if we go to nougat.org, you're going to see that there is a Nougat package for Microsoft Spark. All right. Now, one of the things that I'll sort of point out here is if we go back here to, let's see if I can make this bigger. Okay, just a little bit. Okay. Okay. So notice how the version of the .NET Worker that we have is this here, 0.12.1, right? That's what we downloaded from GitHub from the releases, and that's what we're using. So we're using version 0.12.1. Make sure whatever version of the worker that you're using or that you downloaded and set up on your computer matches up with the version of the Nougat package that you're working with, right? So that's very important. You want to make sure that they match. So now that we want to install this, right? What we tell it is .NET add package Microsoft.ml. What was it? Let's see, yeah, dash version 0.12.1, just to be specific, right? We want to get version 0.12.1. Okay, and that does a bunch of things. And if we inspect our CS project file, we should see that there it is, right? It's not installed. Sure, I'll install the C# extension. Oh, but I want it to work in F#. All right, let's do this. Let's do this again. We're gonna create an F# app. So, are there any benefits? Actually, the code is going to look very similar to C#. So there's not many benefits there, but yeah, let's reload. Okay. Let's see here. All right, so no, I don't want to install anything for now. Archive Analytics. Go back to the terminal. Sure. Let's see. .NET New console O Spark app lang F#. I thought that's what it was. It was -- lang. New console O -- lang. Oh, it's, I always forget this. It's between 1 and 2 dashes. Okay. All right. That's okay. All right. So now we got an F# application instead of a C#. And we're going to basically do the same. Okay. Oh. All right. Cool. I'm not using this though. All right, and let's just make sure that it in fact installed. NetCore 3.1, 0.12.1, beautiful. All right, so now we can start working. So now that we have Microsoft Spark here, we can do open Microsoft.Spark. All right. I forgot, do we have Ionide installed here? We don't, but nothing a quick install. F#. So Ionide is this extension that makes basically running, debugging, and developing F# code really nice inside of VS Code. And okay, cool. So stop this. Let's go back here. All right. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to open Spark, open Microsoft.SQL, because we're going to be working with that sort of namespace or set of functions, right? Now, the first thing we want to do is we want to set up a Spark session, and the Spark session is the entry point for Spark equals to, it's the entry point, right? So Spark session dot builder dot app name. We want to provide a nice name, right? So archive analytics, and then get or create. So what this is going to do is if there is a Spark session existing, it's going to get that one, or it's going to create a brand new one, right? Then what we want to do is we want to load our data into a data frame. So let archive data is equal to Spark session read.json. And then here, what we do is we provide the path of the file or files containing our data, right? So in this case, what we want is okay. So what we want is here, right? So let me actually define this up here. What is it? Data there is equal to data drive, data Kaggle. Okay. Right? Yeah, data drive, data Kaggle. Okay. So it's going to be this file here. And here we just pass data dir. Whoops. Okay. Now, Spark is lazy by default. So even though I've told it, hey, read this JSON file or read the contents of this JSON file, nothing's actually going to happen until I perform or I call some actions on that data. So that's when it actually materializes the operations. So in this case, let's not do any transforms. Let's just go ahead and say archive data dot show. All right, fairly simple. All right, so now that we have basically what we've done is we've created our Spark session. We have, and actually after it shows, let me just do Spark session dot stop, all right, just to be safe. We create a Spark session. We then basically use the read command and to read in JSON that's located at this directory, right? That's the metadata that we're going to be working with. And we loaded that into a data frame. So you'll notice that this, right, it's a Spark data frame. And there's many different ways to represent data in Spark. There's the data frame, there's RDDs, there's data sets. I think they're called data sets now. Which is basically, so at the bottom, the first implementations were the RDDs, right? I forget what they stand for, but RDDs, you can look it up. I'm sure you can find information on that. So what it started off with was RDDs, and then RDDs, they can be very good if you need to really get into the nitty gritty details, but the API is not very intuitive. So then came data frames. Data frames are a little bit more intuitive and slightly more performant API that you're able to use with .NET for Apache Spark. And then data sets is sort of like built on top of the data frame. And my understanding of data sets, the biggest difference is, okay, with data frames, unfortunately, one of the things that you don't get is you're not able to sort of provide type info. Not that you're not able to have typed information, but you're able to have. Sometimes you're not able to basically check your data or get your data. The way that you set up your data, it's not checked, right? So you don't get to use the compiler. Whereas with data sets, everything's statically. You get some static analysis out of it, and as a result, chances are that you're going to catch at compile time. You're going to catch a lot of any potential. You're going to catch many potential errors, as opposed to you would with data frame. So that's my understanding, very high level understanding of how all of these relate. But in this case, we're just working with the data frame, right? And then what we're telling it is just show, and what show is kind of like this. It's similar to pandas with head, right? So if you do data frame dot head, it's going to show you the top n results. I think it's the top 5. With show, I think it's the same thing, right? I think it shows you the top 20 or the first 20. So and then it just displays it as like a pretty print format, and then we're just going to stop our Spark session because we just want to close the connection, right? Now, to run it, it's not exactly the same way that you would run. It's not the same way that you would run a .NET application, right? You don't necessarily run it with .NET Run. The way that you run it is, you go to, first of all, you build your app. And then you can, one of the easiest ways that I like working with it is going to my build output directory. And you're going to notice that among the things that were created, right, you get a lot of the stuff that's all the DLLs and in your application. That gets generated, but then you also get these jar files. You need these jar files in order to, and depending on the version, whether you're using 2.4 or 2.3 version of the SDK, sorry, whether you're using 2.3 or 2.4 version of .NET for Apache Spark. In our case, we're using 2.4.1. That's the one that you're going to want to use. And to submit your jobs, you need to use Spark Submit, right? So Spark. So the way that we would do this is Spark. Actually, forget the commands. I'm going to create a run.sh file here because I always forget the commands for doing this. And I have it. Let's see. Build. All right. Let's see here. Yeah. This is a good. I should probably paste it where? In here, right? The difference is going to be let's see, bin debug netcore app 3.1 / and that way I don't have to keep all right, cool. So let me go level up .NET build, right? Chmod plus X. We want to make our run executable, right? And then we run it. And of course it's going to fail because bin debug netcore app 3.1 Microsoft Spark does not exist. Yes, it does. Bin debug Oh, that's why. Of course, it doesn't exist there, but it exists in the local directory. I forgot about. Boom. Perfect. Let's see. .NET build. And then run. Okay. So stuff is happening, stuff is happening, stuff is happening. You're able to change how noisy this output is. Notice how it's just spitting out info. This doesn't mean that your data is like there's any errors. It's just the logging, the logger settings, and you can kind of get it to not be as noisy. Okay, so it's doing stuff, doing stuff, doing stuff. And notice how there's different tasks executing. Task 10, task 8, task 9. And it's just reading the whole file. All right. So now we spent what, about an hour setting it up. It's probably the same amount of time that we would have probably spent writing our own parser. But why do that when you can just use stuff that's out of the box, and that's going to give you additional benefits, because once we're able to validate that, hey, we're able to basically load this data and sort of read it in somewhat nice format, then what we can do is, there it is. All right. Yep, there it is. See, so here are our columns, and here are our values. All right. There it is. So we were able to read it, and we were able to display the top 20 outputs. All right. Cool. So let's do something a little bit more interesting now. Let's see. Let's take a look at so we have authors, we have title. Let's do categories. This one seems like a pretty easy one to do. All right, categories. So now we're going to go back here, and let's build upon this. Let's get rid of the show. And let's say let's categories. So in this case, archive data dot select call categories. Is that what it's called? Let's see, functions.call. Categories dot ali categories by actually, let me see something. I think it's by value. Count. Is this the right one? No. No. Hold on. Cancel. Let's see here. Functions call. Count. Dot. Okay. All right. So I think I can do that, and then categories dot this one. Oh, show. Sorry. Show 10. Okay. So what's happening here is I'm telling it select the categories column and call it categories, because essentially what's going to happen is it's going to transform it and it's going to call it something else. But I just tell it, hey, just keep the name categories. And then you tell it group by categories, count and get the count of all those categories, and then just order in descending order to see what are the top categories, right, that are published in the data set. So now let me do .NET build just to make sure that the latest version is there, and then run.sh. Okay, so we're in business here. Okay, all right. Very nice. Boom, there you go. So now you're able to see that. I'm going to guess that this is astrophysics. We need some sort of table, but astrophysics has 86,914 papers published, followed by all these other ones. Yeah. So it seems like our thing is working. Awesome. So it actually worked out quite nicely because it is now 11:03. I know I said I was going to do a little bit of a longer stream, but I have a few things to take care of. But I'm happy. I'm happy with our progress. I'm happy that we were able to install .NET for Apache Spark. This has actually been probably one of the most productive streams in a while. So we installed .NET for Apache Spark, talked a little bit about what it was, the reason why we had to do .NET for Apache Spark, which was we can't read a 3 gig file just using standard System.io, right? Or at least not without making a few tweaks. And we were able to do a few very relatively simple transformations. In this case, we were able to get, what the top 10, is it top 10? Yeah. what the top 10 categories in this data set belong to, right? So I think that we're going to keep going with this. There's a few things that I'm going to want to play around with on Wednesday when I do the next stream. But I think this is as good a place as any to call it a day. I'm pretty happy. Let me actually do one thing um, before I head off. Let me see. One thing I want to do is I want to add a get ignore. Code.get ignore. All right, so basically want to add VS Code. Okay, get status, add status. All right, so let's see, Spark, app working, push, origin master. Git push origin archive dataset project. Okay. So now you should be able to go to my GitHub. All right, you should be able to go to my stream projects, and if you look in this archive dataset project, you should see the latest changes. Cool. All right. So with that, I'm going to call it a day. Thanks again for joining. And yeah, this was fun. I'm excited. Now we can actually move forward. We were able to get our data loaded, and yeah, we can actually do some analysis. And I think, you know, I was trying to go with the data frame API. Now, the data frame API, not to be confused with the Spark data frame. And there is some interoperability, but we'll see how we can get that working in the next few streams. But I think we're going to start using .NET for Apache Spark to do a little bit of our analysis, or at the very least, massaging our data so that we can get it in a format that's a little bit more more easy to process. Cool. All right. Thanks again for joining, and we'll see you Wednesday. Take care. Bye-bye.